move on to the Finance and Resources OSC proper. And once again, formally going through the agenda. Item 1 is to receive the minutes of the last meeting. Can I ask if there are any feedback or comments on on December's minutes? And I have to believe you on this one because I wasn't there. Okay, we will take that as read, but I will ask the Vice Chair to sign those. Apologies for absence. I have a few apologies. We have Councillor Adeleke, Councillor Cox and Councillor Wilkie. Although Councillor Wilkie attends, although not a member. Do we have any other apologies? No. Right. Let's say that. Yes, there's certainly the measurement of apologies really is just to see whether we are the most popular committee. I'm counting that we are because of the attendance previous to this. Okay, so that's minutes. That's apologies noted. Any declarations of interest? No. Public participation. We have none, but there are some visiting councillors that do have some questions on an item further down. So agenda item 5 is consideration of any matters referred to the committee for call-in. There are none. And action points from the previous meeting, which we've just rolled straight through. So we had a question to Nigel about the increase in pest control fees, and we had a request for Ben to provide costs of updating the pay by phone machines, which I believe have been submitted to members. So I'm assuming we're happy to close those actions. And then from the previous meeting, we had a request to Sanj Chowdhury to confirm the CSU staff turnover figure with Councillor Elliott. We satisfied with the response? Okay, so we can close all of the outstanding agenda items. Councillor Guest. Thank you, Chairman.
I was the one who asked about the projected increase in income from increased pest control fees. The information has been supplied, so I'm content.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to the first discussion point for today, which is the draft budget proposals for 24-25. So, Nigel, would you like to repeat everything you just told us about 20 minutes ago?
You'd be glad to know I'm not going to repeat anything, and I'm assuming there's no questions from Councillor Burney since he's gone through the whole report. In terms of what's in front of you, you've got the general overview at Appendix A, an update on Appendix B, which again only has the change in regards to the Climate and Sustainability Reserve movement I talked about earlier. And then a slight change to previous years, we've put in the capital strategy and treasury strategy just to give members an opportunity to review those as well. And again, we've added the budget consultation response. Now, this is probably the main new thing in terms of the budget for 24-25. As members will be aware, we undertook a consultation with residents that took place over a period between the 6th of December and I think it was the 11th of January. And the responses are included in the pack. In terms of the highlights from that budget consultation, nothing groundbreaking would probably be my headline. In terms of residents' key services, the ones that they value the most, things like waste and responding to antisocial behaviour came up quite highly, as you would expect. And when it came to paying for charges, residents seem to feedback that they would rather see charges that the vast majority of residents don't buy go up, whereas the services that the vast majority of residents pay for don't go up. So again, it's a very similar trend with what we'd expect with consultations. Unfortunately, increasing planning fees will not recoup as much money as 2 or 3% on car parking. So unfortunately, it's great to have that feedback, and it's something that we want to develop for next year and work on as well. And we've even spoken with the leader about potentially looking at the new youth council and youth voice approach, at trying to tap into some of the youth of the borough to see what their views and their opinions are. So we will develop. This was very good in terms of moving it on to proper consultation online, which people could access easily. But it's something that we'll look to develop over the next 10 to 12 months into a more robust piece of work as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Oh, no, we don't. Okay. So thank you for that, Nigel. So now we will. Oh, yeah, Councillor Burney. Unless he's winding me up.
Sorry about that, Chairman. Although it was an excellent idea to consult with the residents, I think we must agree that 175 responses out of something like 28,000 possibilities is really quite pathetic, and one can't really give any credence, any weight to the responses that we got. And I'm pleased to hear that we're going to try it again, but presumably we'll try and other means of attracting responses from the general public.
So I hope Councillor Tyndall might want to come in.
Yep, I can see that Councillor Tyndall wants to have a word.
If I may, Chair, talking to other council leaders in the county, the general view is that most consultations are not very well supported, and primarily by the older generations. So there is a serious effort going on amongst several leaders to look to see how we can actually get into more contact with the younger generations, in order that we can find out exactly what people need in the borough. So it's ongoing. It's very difficult, but I think there are several districts and even counties are looking at ways in which better consultation can take place.
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. I'm probably abusing my position with the microphone on this one. I think that we can all agree with Councillor Burney that we would like consultation rates to be higher, and obviously it is easier for officers to make decisions based on higher consultation rates. However, this is one of the areas where I feel that councillors themselves have a key role in trying to improve that. Again, it is difficult. There is apathy, as Councillor Tyndall has said. It is a difficult context. But while we need officers to do as much as possible to promote stuff, I think that councillors have a direct role and a direct responsibility on that with award sides. Any officers wanting to comment before I go on to the next question? No, Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chairman. But Councillor Dewar is getting ahead of me, so I'll give way
No,
to him.
Councillor Guest was before me.
Rather than argue, I've got two questions here. The first one's drilling down a bit deeper into this consultation, that it was done on the Let's Talk Decorum website. It was advertised on social media and the weekly decorum e-bulletins. But what mechanisms were there for the digitally excluded to take part in the consultation?
So, Councillor, we made sure there were copies of the consultation available at the reception in the forum. So if people came into the building, they would be able to access that. There was also a contact address for those who maybe didn't have access to electronic means of submission, and also a telephone number they could call if they wanted to engage. So we were mindful of that, and we did try and make sure that there was sufficient provision for those who perhaps wouldn't find it easy to fill in an online survey. Thank you. And the second question refers to the long-term view of capital expenditure plans, and on item paragraph 2.6, it states that leisure investment plans will be discussed with members in early 2024. We're now in February 2024, so how early is early?
So in terms of informal discussions, they've already started, and we're now in discussions around commissioning some additional external support, as well as some internal work in terms of the leisure strategy as well. So those discussions are ongoing at the moment, and they'll develop over the next 3 to 6 months in terms of proposals we can put to the administration on what that investment strategy would look like.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions, actually. The first one is for, I think, probably Mark, with regard on page 22, 4.3, it makes a little one. It refers to informal cabinet, and it's really a governance point. I'm not sure whether the word informal is correct in that context. Insofar as informal implies that it's just informal and is not likely to be recorded. I think what you're aiming for is probably ad hoc cabinet meetings, where they are formalised and they are reported, minuted and reported. Would the officers and the executive member, portfolio holder, be happy to change the word informal to ad hoc? That's my first question. I have one supplementary.
I'll take that, Chair. The meeting that's being referred to is actually now the portfolio holder SLT group, which is an informal meeting just to scope out policy ideas and strategy. So it's not a formal decision-making body in any form. So it's doesn't need to be linked in any way to the constitution or changed. I think informal cabinet is just a term which is transferred to portfolio holder SLT over time.
So on that basis, and hearing what you just said, and bearing in mind that this is something which is within the strategy document, will informal cabinet discussions be recorded and available for the public?
No, Chair. This is an informal, and it's supposed to be a sort of a private space to develop ideas. So it's not a public meeting in any form. So formal minutes aren't produced and won't be available to the public now.
Okay. My next point was, if I may, on page 30, table 3, the cash balances. I just wonder if Nigel probably could just explain, I may have missed it, why the capital receipts should show such a significant drop in 25-26 compared with 24-25 and 23-24.
So the capital receipts are dropping continually from 22-23 all the way down to 25-26 because of the investment in the capital programme, in terms of a combination of housing capital receipts, but also the leisure strategy, which is assuming it will have financing in 25-26 as well. As we utilise capital receipts, they will reduce. The reason we had such a significant amount of capital receipts is one-off sale of Maylands, which was circa 20 million, which members will remember 3 or 4 years ago. We're now looking at investing those into our asset base over the life of the capital programme.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyndall was going to make a comment on your previous inquiry.
Thank you, Jack. Yes, when the administration came into office, we found that there were cabinet meetings taking place where we met with the senior leadership team, which were technically informal and therefore discussions rather than the legally binding cabinet meetings, which are open to the public. I therefore asked for the introduction of portfolio holder meetings to distinguish between those meetings which were informal and therefore private, and cabinet meetings which were formal and therefore legal and abiding by statute. So therefore everybody on the council can now see that when it says portfolio holder meeting, that is an informal meeting which is for discussions on any particular subject that happens to be needed, rather than a formal cabinet meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. Next question is for Councillor Gale, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just a question on the consultation, just about how the questions are derived. In particular, question 3, which is on page 61, which says, which services would you not prioritise for council funding? Please select a maximum of 5 services which are least important to you. And I noticed that 5 respondents skipped that question. I'm just wondering what's the utility of that question? You've already asked a question about which you would prioritise, and I'm just curious to know whether question 3 adds anything.
So, to a certain extent, the first question asks, what's most important? What do you want us to invest in? And the question of the 5 least important is, what don't you want us to invest in? That was the rationale for the questioning. You know, interestingly, in terms of that question, some of the responses probably tell you a lot in terms of the respondents to the questionnaire. For instance, one of the responses there is adventure playgrounds. Now, the perception that we have is that we probably had very few users of the adventure playgrounds that we were able to engage and get a response from, rather than users of the service that were saying it's no longer cost effective. So again, that's where the volume of responses, as we've all alluded to, we all want to see an improvement in that, and we all want to see how we engage with the public more this year to try and increase what kind of response we get. But yes, that was the aim of the question. It was there to try and see, you know, what are we doing that residents don't want us to do, in effect.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to sound a note of caution with that particular question, of course, because if you have a question like that, which people feel compelled, I mean, I see 5 respondents skipped it, but normally when filling a questionnaire, one has to make a choice, and then you get a percentage, and of course you've got these percentages of people. So when the headline is 49% of people want to cut community events, that's of course 49% of the people that answered the question. And so it could at first sight, it could generate a slightly misleading summary of the results.
I feel that the right time to put the famous quote, and I'm not going to be able to attribute it correctly, but there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics. Okay, do we have Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, one question. 176 people replied to this, which is 0.00 something % of the population. How many people have to reply to this for us to take notice? What percentage of the population? Or is it, we're never going to get there?
It's a very interesting question. I almost want to quote Councillor Friedman's last quote. In terms of how many, I think it depends on what the information is saying. If we only had 175 people respond, but 175 people said, we don't want you to do X, so effectively 100% of everybody who responded said something you're doing is wrong, then I think that would get noticed, even though it's a small number. But until you start getting to a significant proportion of the resident population, you know, how much impetus will this consultation have? It's questionable. But again, it's put in front of members to allow them to gauge the opinion that we're getting. What is also added to this is a raft of other information. All our councillors have their ward meetings, they all have their surgeries, they get that feedback. Our cabinet have a summary of that feedback at their group meeting. So they often feedback, and I find personally that councillors, and I think Councillor Friedman alluded to it earlier in terms of councillors trying to get people to respond. Councillors have a very good feel for what their residents in their wards actually want and don't want. And that plays a bigger driver in some of the strategy and the policy making than this consultation would at the moment. I stress, you know, we've taken a different approach this year than what we have done in previous years, and we need to build on that. I'd like to get us to a point where we got a consultation that we felt did get a meaningful response and could drive future policy. But again, it would go through those formal channels in terms of the group and the membership to assess how they wanted to utilise that information.
Thank you. We've got another question from Councillor Gale.
Yes, I mean, I suppose it's more of an observation based on Councillor Elliott's question and the answer to it, which is perhaps a note of caution in that the councillors are, there are 51 of us elected with a mandate. We know how we got here, and it's our job to make the decisions. When you have a survey, I mean, this is a very, very small sample, but even with a slightly larger sample, you still don't know who these people are who are answering the questions. You don't know how they got to the website. You've no idea what's going on behind the scenes with surveys. I have a certain, perhaps slightly different take on this from my professional capacity in terms of intellectual property law, where there's been a certain amount of judicial discussion about whether survey evidence can be admitted as evidence. If a judge has got to make a decision and then you have a survey taken which effectively makes the decision for that judge, that is a bit of a usurpation of the judicial function. And if there's a decision to be made by an elected group of people and you have a survey done, if it is a large survey and you say it's, you know, if it is sort of, let's say 5%, even 5% of the population, the temptation is simply just to abdicate the responsibility to make the decision. And I would be concerned about a usurpation of the legislative function in that case.
Again, I think what we've got to remember is a consultation is one form of evidence base. There are many others. From that perspective, we provide these to the members, to the groups and to the cabinet as part of one form of evidence. Different councillors will hold different sway, be that conscious or unconscious bias, be that on the evidence base that's put in front of them. But my understanding and my belief, and which again I support, is that the current administration would like to do as much engagement with residents as possible and look to take that consultation where we can. My job in terms of this consultation is to try and make it as good as it can be going forward, and then present that to members to allow them to utilise it as they see fit.
Thanks, Nigel. Again, I'm going to abuse the fact I've got the soapbox. I believe it's a key role of councillors on scrutiny committees to ensure that we feel that officers are paying attention to consultations. So whether a consultation is large or small, if we feel that it is being ignored, we've got a role to step up and using that. I don't know if people are feeling that there are voices in the consultation that are not being heard at all, but obviously if officers are hearing them but sort of referencing them with other information sources, as Nigel has just pointed out. So we can't simply rely on the consultation. There are other things to do, and we have a role in that. So just to say, I've got Councillor Hannell coming in with the next question, and I've got Councillor Burney and Councillor England. Councillor Hannell.
Yeah, this is an observation really about page 61. I wasn't really compelled to talk on this, but it is a concern for me, because if you look at page 61 in terms of the top 5 services that the respondents would not prioritise for council funding, that I don't recognise that in the Decorum borough that I've lived in all of my life. And if that influences in any way capital spend, that is not going to be reflective of the kind of consultations I have with the people in my ward who actually are keen on adventure playgrounds, they are keen on arts, they are keen on community events and culture. And I just don't see that reflected here. Chair, the concern I have, if we keep asking the same, if we keep using the same medium and we keep getting the same respondents, we're going to be influenced by the same responses. And that for me is a concern moving forward.
I'm not sure if officers need to respond to that one if they can. I would say that I share those views, and I think it's up to all of us to find multiple ways to attract residents' feedback. We obviously need formal ways of doing that, and these type of surveys are just one of them. Okay, Councillor Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Hannell meant our ward. rather than my ward. But as far as these sorts of surveys are concerned, it is true that councillors could actually elicit responses from a wider range than perhaps something done over the internet only is concerned. And I would really like that to be the case. I would have thought that the next thing we would have, if we got a very big response, is Nigel and his team complaining about the fact that they don't have the resources to deal with the number of responses that we've got. And it could turn out to be quite a significant charge, I would think, on resources.
Just a couple of comments to come back on. Firstly, just to reiterate, this was not an internet-based only engagement. There were paper copies available. People were able to write in of their own free will with an address, and there was a specific telephone number which people could phone and go through the questionnaire. This was by no means just an internet-based only response vehicle. But coming back to your second point, if it would have been purely online, it doesn't matter how many people respond. We have a very good system in place now. If 20,000 people would have responded, the system would have collated them all. It would have taken a lot more going through the 3 text columns than it did. But the other core data, the vast majority of it, would have been easily accessible and easily analysed from an analytical point of view. So that is a big benefit of online surveys, as well as the fact that it does cater to the majority of our residents when we've taken feedback on this before. But we always have to make sure we cater to all our residents when we do these engagements.
Thank you again. Councillor England.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if you were going to do a consultation on anything, the driest subject you could choose is probably, what do you think about the budget? I think maybe there's scope for us to say, what do you think about the cost of living, and spin it that way to get people to engage with it. We can learn all those things, and I think we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much that on the first go round it maybe hasn't worked. This is a new platform. I'm not sure what kind of responses we used to get on the previous method. But what I most wanted to say is this is a council which respects consultation and replies. And that means that it's incumbent on us to try as hard as we can to ask questions which people can answer in a way that will allow us to draw the insights that we want. Having said that, we're all elected to take decisions in the round and not to be too slavish about saying, well, the consultation said this, and that's the only piece of evidence. I think Nigel kind of said something similar. So we'll get better at asking questions, and that will both hopefully improve the quality situation and the quantity situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor England. I'm not really sure there's anything you can respond on that one. Okay, a question from me, and apologies because I know that you've answered this in a previous session, so it's to give some clarity on the side. Within the capital strategy, we look at the capital financing requirement, and that's obviously driven by some calculations of a 5-year projection on some of the projects that we need. Could you just give us an overview of how robust the numbers that go into those requirements are, and what the process of updating them are?
So we have, as a council in recent years, had issues in terms of capital slippage on spend. And again, I won't talk onerously, but things like COVID, the moratorium, and the 25 to 30% increase in housing building costs have meant that the capital projects have slipped. We have now got a far better handle on that, and we've obviously got over some of those hurdles in terms of the planning moratorium, the COVID, and also a lot of the procurement has been done for our house building programme. So in terms of how much we project to spend over the next 3 to 5 years, I'm far more confident that we're going to get close to what we say we're going to spend. We have a new formal capital programme board in place that monitors that spend on a monthly basis, and that is a lot more scrutiny and a lot more analysis than we've had previously. So I think the capital spend is very accurate. In terms of the capital financing that we're going to utilise for that, that's using existing capital grants, Homes England grants that Fiona mentioned earlier that we've got for a lot of our housing developments, and also some of the other grants that we've already secured. So we're confident in terms of how it's going to get financed and delivery at this point in time. More confident than previous because we've gone through a lot of the procurement processes for those sites, so we know what the spend's going to be, and we've also got contractual timelines in place. So I would expect slippage next year to be significantly lower than what we've seen, particularly in the last couple of years, and a lot more certainty is there. So more confident than ever. But again, I must add the caveat with the capital programme. We've got some 10, 20, 30 million pound projects in there, and if one of those has a problem, we had a significant issue this year. Hope doesn't happen again with Eastwick Row with a provider. That can very quickly throw out a capital programme. But if there's no significant, unforeseen unknowns, then I expect it to be delivering a lot closer to budgeted expectations than we have done in recent years.
I believe that's the end of, no, we have Councillor Duris.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a phrase that Nigel used at the beginning of that last response, where it seemed to imply that we'd not been very good previously with regard to slippage. And my question would be, is it a fact of life that across all public authorities, indeed commercial entities, there has been slippage? And in fact, the fact that we're being able to refine it a little bit better is because we've probably got different technologies coming through that allow us to do that. But we are not unusual in terms of slippage that has taken place in the past, and we're not an outlier.
Given the obstacles that we've undertaken in the last couple of years, the level of slippage has been entirely within what I would have expected. You are entirely right. Apologies if I was alluding to poor performance before. Things like a planning moratorium stopping you from getting planning permission is going to impact on your capital programme. And equally, taking more time to procure a service because it's 25 or 30% more expensive is the right thing to do. So it wasn't poor performance. There were just some very big obstacles that came along that maybe I naively expect not to come along in the near future because they are hopefully one in a generation. So yes, performance was as good as we could have done it in that period of time, but I would expect things to get back to a new normal and close to how it was 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, right, thank you very much, Nigel, once again. And we move on to our next agenda item, which is the KPIs. And as we alluded to before, we can now actually talk about some of the specifics on those KPIs and possibly questions on the target. So I'll come back to Aidan. Again, I'll invite you to repeat your presentation if you wish.
No, I'm sure you're more bored than I am of hearing about it. I'm happy to take questions, comments.
Councillor Guest, you did get in first.
Thank you, Chairman. And just scrolling down there, we are on page 71 of the reports pack. This proposed KPI, the communication, staff satisfaction with internal comms, and that seems to be a bit subjective. So how can it be quantified and made objective?
I'm worried that the answer is going to be about a survey.
There's always a survey. So the thinking behind this is, so we do indeed run a staff survey every year. So we do have actual benchmark data, just to refer back to Councillor Duris's point earlier. And that is probably, for something like internal communications, is probably the most sure way that we can be confident that it is having the impact that we that we want it to have. Equally, with this particular target, you might look at it and go, well, that number's quite low. Clearly, that isn't the extent of our ambition is to hit 55%. The extent of our ambition would be to hit 100%. But based on where we are at the moment, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's below that, it feels a reasonable goal for the next 12 months. Now, the period in the next few weeks is for us to kind of really kick the tires on all the numbers on the right-hand side there to make sure that they are robust. And this conversation is part of that. But in terms of kind of internal comms, we really want something that's a bit, that's tangible, not just, you know, we've put out, I don't know, 6 intranet articles or something like that, which it measures how much work we've done. It doesn't measure kind of how people feel about it.
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up?
That answers my question, so there's no follow-up. Other than that, I'll be followed by Councillor Davis.
Indeed.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. In fact, I was going to ask a slightly different twist to that particular question and that particular point, but I'm going to take it offline if I may and talk to you separately.
And we're keeping the questions going down that side of the room with Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I'll start with a question. I've got a question, an observation and a concern. So I'm back to page 71, and I just want to clarify if I'm understanding this right. The profile target for average days lost to sickness, is that an accumulative, and therefore do I get to the assumption is the average days lost would be somewhere between 11 and 12 per FTE?
Yes, it is. It would be, and that's because, again, at the moment, that is below what we currently are, but is not the extent of our overall ambition, if that makes sense. So that also takes into account, for example, long-term sick, which can skew the figures quite considerably. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that refers to, sorry, just to add a little bit, you'll see that it's different per quarter. So tries to take into account, for example, you will have more sickness in the winter.
Yeah. Thank you. Obviously, there's a whole suite of new ones here. The one that strikes me, I mean, it's difficult to pick up ones that are missing, but the one that strikes me as being obviously missing is collection rates of council tax. Appears not to be on here, which is something wholly under the control of this council and very important to provision of services and our income. That seems to be a startling one missing, but that's just more of an observation. It's very difficult to judge on this, you know, how well we're performing and what our current targets are. So what I would request is that where they exist, we could be sent a list of the corresponding targets for these KPIs for the current year, 23-24, so we can compare what they are now and what they set at. That's just a request. And then my last one is my concern, and I move us back to the recommendations at the start of the report. And my understanding, if I'm reading it right, recommendation 2, that each portfolio holder is delegated authority to amend the KPIs, set out the appendix or set new KPIs. I'm not sure what the control mechanism for that, but it reads to me that if we're not performing very well or we're failing to be up to a KPI, a portfolio holder can simply, at a stroke of a pen, change the KPI at will. And there doesn't seem to be a control mechanism for that. It doesn't say it's a reported decision. It just seems to me that we're not performing well. The administration or the responsible portfolio holder could simply alter a target to make sure we're hitting a target that we were previously failing to hit. And that causes me quite a lot of concern. I would have thought that changing KPIs should at least be a cabinet level public decision rather than under the counter stroke of a pen.
So we'll pass that to Nigel, and possibly Councillor Tinner might want to comment as well.
I was just going to come back on the first question around collection rates. So collection rates for council tax and for business rates have been moved from a KPI to an SPI, so they'll still be reported to members. But what will be included in the financial performance report is the performance to budget of council tax collection and business rates collection, because as you've alluded to, it is very much a risk, and more a risk now than it has been previously. So it's just a change in how it's reported rather than it being missed off in terms of reporting.
Thank you. Aidan, Mark, did you want to comment about the ownership of KPIs and the ability to modify them?
Sure, and we can circulate the a broader document as you requested, Councillor Williams. That's not a problem. In terms of the decision making, it's probably not as worded as clearly as it perhaps could be here. What we're essentially talking about is not if we're performing very badly, reducing target so that we suddenly go from red to green. It's actually, if we've been hitting green for quite a number of months, it's actually pushing on to see if we can extend that. If it is a portfolio holder decision, it will obviously be set out and documented as such. And I think what we're also referring to is actually if we identify that there should be an additional KPI or that there is the opportunity for an additional KPI, rather than wait a number of months to go through various different hoops, why don't we just start reporting on it in a much quicker fashion? That's the thinking behind it.
Thanks very much. I've got Councillor Capozzi. Are you asking on this item or no? So we'll go to Ron.
Thank you. Can I thank Councillor Williams for his question? I must admit I had not spotted that interpretation of what's on paper. I will undertake to look at it carefully and make sure that any changes of KPIs that are of has to come before Cabinet and have a formal decision.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I will say, from my professional point, I get the concern there. It ties into my earlier question about where in the council the KPIs are owned and controlled by, because you've got both the setting of the KPIs plus any time that you want to exempt certain things from a standard KPI and pull them out. Councillor England.
Yeah, can I just make a comment on this point? I think it's a bit disrespectful of officers to suggest that they would be happy to agree to something that was quote unquote under the table.
Noted, but I believe that we have the action point that we're going to put something slightly more formal and robust about how the KPIs will be managed. I think that there is an unintended interpretation on what's been written, and we do agree that we'll put something more formal in. Can we draw a line under that point? Councillor Williams?
Just to say, in response to Councillor England, officers might not be happy with it. As I read this, it's portfolio holders, members who make the decisions, and therefore it could be this would imply that a member could make that decision. So I'm grateful for the clarification from the leader.
Okay, thank you. So we're moving on to the next point. Councillor Capozzi.
Thank you, Chair. Page 71 as well, under corporate and commercial services, general fund variance, housing revenue account budget variance and capital variance all against the forecast for the period, a target of, I'm assuming that means 0% change, so forecast equals actual, which I'm sure we would all love to see and probably will never see. Would it be, as opposed to having a failure because you didn't reach the target, or if there's going to be an allowance or a sort of like a scale, plus or minus 2% or something, I don't know what that would feel like, but something like that would be more realistic to manage ourselves and make sure that we are performing and not going greatly different to our forecast, as opposed to 0. And then if it's deemed that plus or minus 2% is meaningless, then is it worth having 3 KPIs that would never be achievable?
I will invite Nigel to answer that in the formal capacity, but again, I'm not going to overstep my bounds. A KPI is not just useful in a binary point. Whilst the achieving of a target, yes or no, is a valuable thing to watch, very often tracking how KPIs change, what the trends are. So if you've got a target that you're not achieving, but month on month you can see that you're getting closer and closer, it's got a lot of use. The simple measuring of these things and the obligation to measure is often just as important as trying to get that target. Nigel.
I'm going to be very boring. I expect budget holders to deliver on their budget. So I think having a target to say that you are going to deliver and that target be zero variance or better, if they underspend, then that would be considered green. What we do need to have a discussion around, and I'm happy to pick this up with yourself and Councillor Tyndall, it is around where the green, amber and red target boundaries are. And it may be that overspending by a few percent is amber and then a greater percent becomes red, which I think is probably a sensible approach, which again, as Aidan has said, we're still bouncing around what those types, but I would expect the green to be balancing a budget or better. Because we're not in a fiscal environment where we can afford, we've got 40 or 50 budget holders. If they're all over by 5,000, you're instantly to £250,000 overspent. So unfortunately, I've got a bit of a red line there in terms of my expectations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart.
Page 71, revenue and benefits, average days taken to respond to benefits queries and council tax related contacts from residents. The 14 days and 16 days, are they calendar days or business or available days or working days? If they're working days, I think a target of 14 days, 3 weeks effectively, to respond to a resident who's panicking about their benefits, and possibly 4 weeks for a council tax, somebody trying to resolve council tax issues, seems very high.
So in terms of the targets, there would be an improvement on current performance. What I would say is the wording of this may need slightly changing because it's not taken to respond to a case, to resolve an issue. And some of the issues we've seen in particularly in the last couple of years, the issues are far more complex than they used to be, particularly since universal credit came in, and it's going to get more complex in 2024 when we're doing a migration of some housing benefits residents over onto universal credit as well. So the target that is set there is a stretch target on current performance. And again, I think it would have been handy, like Councillor Durry said, in terms of showing what our current performance and current targets were. And yes, and maybe a better description would make that sound more appropriate, because often some of these, we're not going into too much detail, some of these will be somebody making a query, us asking for information, waiting for them to send us information, getting that, then relaying to DWP or somebody else, then going back to the user, asking more information. So there's a process there. It's not a case of somebody just sending us an email and waiting, 14 working days to get an actual response. There could be a huge amount of activity in that period of time. So I can see how that description is not entirely clear.
Oh yeah, because it says respond, it doesn't say resolve. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. We'll move on to Councillor Hannell.
Chair, I'm drawn to page 69 as a paramedic and somebody who's dealing with some cases of damp and mould in the ward that I represent with Councillor Burney, of course. I see that the number of live damp and mould cases there is a target of 200. I'm not naive enough to think that's an aspiration, but I just think that maybe it should say something like number of live damp and mould cases being held for a period of 100 days or more is 200. I think that there should here be the green, amber, red matrices apply to this, but it should be about a number of days rather than the fact that there are these live cases.
Aidan, are you able to comment on that one?
I think the best I can do here is take that away and have a chat with the housing team.
Okay, so that was quite thorough on KPIs. Last chance for anybody to come in with any additional questions, and Councillor Gale.
Yes, what's a non-complaint gold contract? On page 69, commercial housing contracts.
69, okay, I'll pass that to Nigel.
And I'll pass it straight back. I'm not entirely sure. I can take it away and find out.
Okay, and with that, we will close the agenda item and we'll move on to our next item. So Ben, thank you very much for being so patient on there, and we will move on to our parking strategy.
Excellent, thank you very much, Chair. We're meeting on a regular basis this committee and this report. So I'd just like to bring to your attention that following Cabinet decision in December last year to accept the proposals and move to statutory consultation, the administration received a number of representations from members and businesses and residents expressing concern at the proposed changes to parking. On the back of that, the administration have again updated the changes to the parking proposals, and these are set out in section 2.2 of the report. And I would also like to bring to your attention section 2.4, which is the indicative timeframe for moving forward with the new proposals for parking. I haven't got any further information to update with this committee, and I'm not sure if there'll be any questions, but I'll open it up for some.
Well, we definitely do have questions, because we've, before I open the floor, we've had 2 requests to come in from our colleagues that are visiting. So we will come to Councillor Johnson first.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much a question as comments, as you expect from 2 councillors in King's Langley ward, which we share. Can I just say, whilst understanding the desire to introduce consistency across the borough, one must also recognise there are differences. The parking regime for a town of 20,000 people may not be suitable for a village of 5,000 people. Our response to the initial consultation and the various reports since have been consistent. Setting the wrong charging regime in our high street will kill the shops, the vast majority of which are independents. That's not our view, that's the very vocal view of our traders. Neither they or we are opposed to a charging regime, but the very short periods of time permitted for parking will encourage a rather manic version of supermarket sweep, as residents and visitors try to do some shopping and have a coffee or go for a meal with friends in less than an hour. We feel spot pricing in such a high street is not bringing consistency. In terms of our residents, I would have to note that a higher percentage are aged 45 and over, and an even higher percentage over 65 and over, and that's higher than anywhere else in the borough. That age bracket has actually grown considerably over the last 10 years. They are not going to walk home with a couple of bags of shopping or jump on a bicycle. I appreciate there is a 4-hour limit now in the 2 free car parks, but our volunteers in the hospice shop or the community centre or the library or employed in the shops themselves will need those spaces for their shifts. And even then, some of them will have to move their cars to residential streets. So what is the answer? Currently in the high street, there has been 1 hour parking, no return for 2 hours, with residents and visitors aware that because if there was no charge, there was very little likelihood of enforcement action on a regular basis. If there is a 4-hour limit in the car parks, there is arguably more sense in reflecting the current arrangements with 1 hour rather than 30 minutes free, but then charging for time spent thereafter. This will enable the motorist to make a rational decision along the length of the high street about how much he or she is willing to pay. Such a massive shift as has been proposed will be like opening a Pandora's box of miseries for local people and traders. I hope this committee will give them the last thing remaining in that box, hope, and that the current proposals for King's Langley are amended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'm going to presume that Councillor Anderson's comments are similar, so I will invite Councillor Anderson to ask his question before coming in to Ben. That might make sense.
Thank you, Chair. I think you find the relations between the ward councillors and King's Langley are quite good, so we actually communicated before we turned up tonight, and we'll try to cover something slightly different. One apologies you got both of us, but we are rather constrained by not having representation on this committee. What's been proposed, what's been changed is obviously better from our point of view than what was proposed previously, and we're grateful for that. But what our view is that it's still, it's better, but it's still too high a charge, and it would far from supporting our local businesses, it would actually cause them quite significant harm because other places will be able to compete. Councillor Johnson's gone about going over 1 hour. There is an obvious difficulty with having different regimes in the same road, and confusion if you're going to have 3 different charging regimes for 3 different parking bays along the same section of road. Exactly. And the other key issue, concern I have, Chair, is that for years I've had traders saying to me, why can't we have the first hour free and then charging thereafter? Because that would actually lead to greater footfall, and wouldn't deter those that are coming to do quick shopping. And the argument has always been, which I got from Councillor Williams and I passed on so many occasions, is that having a free charging period is uneconomical. Because if people are parking quickly and going, you're not getting any income from them, and yet you're having to enforce it. So it actually starts costing more than the actual revenue you get out of it. So I've always been following the perceived conventional wisdom that you can't have certain periods free. And I've signed up to that, and I've told people they can't have the first hour free. And then lo and behold, we start having the amended proposal we're discussing tonight, which includes 3 periods. And I'm wondering, well, hang on a minute, what's going on? This is a bit confusing, because if one's accepting that it is possible and is economical, then I agree 100% with Councillor Johnson and the traders that the first hour free would actually be the best solution for our high street. But it just seems to have got I'm a bit confused on that front. There's 2 quick things. One is there's a parking bay round the corner in Common Lane, which for some reason has been excluded from the King's Langley analysis. And secondly, I've got a question. I've had a constituent ask me about motorcycles, and I'd be very grateful for that. And my last point, Chair, is as popular as trying to get members of the public to pay using the mobile phone apps. My understanding is for years, the vast bulk of people, it's much more popular to use credit card contactless to pay for parking. It's always been, my understanding is that it's much bigger participation. That's how people pay for the parking. So by all means, try and promote using an app, but please don't take away contactless card, because that is the most convenient form of payment that our residents have. In summary, Chair, I really would urge the administration. I apologise that it means having to think it yet again when this has already been through several iterations. But please, on behalf of King's Langley, can we ask for another rethink? Because this is, even in this revised form, it is going to cause very serious harm to our businesses, and that's what we're really worried about, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I'll just split your question up into 2 parts. Just in regards to payment mechanisms, that is something that this committee has discussed, and we've had some sort of general directions of travel proposed, and there have been a number of comments on ensuring that we have systems that do not require smartphones and apps, and making sure that we've got credit card machines. Ben has responded to that. I don't know if we're all on board with the answers, but he has noted those concerns. So I've got Councillor Tyndall waiting to respond. I'll come to Ben first. We'll do Councillor Tyndall first. Okay.
If Ben would like to deal with the technical questions, I'll then deal with the strategic questions.
Sure. So in particular on the individual bays at King's Langley, I think you're the best to respond there.
I'm going to refer back to Councillor Tyndall on that. In terms of what the proposal is, this has been put forward by the administration,
Okay.
in terms of the offer. So I think it's fair for the administration to respond.
Councillor Tyndall.
Yeah, we listened to Councillor Anderson at the last meeting and understood the situation regarding businesses in our smaller villages, and indeed there is an issue about businesses in Hemel as well, given post-COVID situation and the continuing lack of growth in the economy generally. So we in no way wish to endanger the business world. However, there does have to be decisions made about parking, about how we pay for the enforcement of it. We are constrained in Kings Langley because there are probably 2 car parks where at the moment there are no charges. That actually has generated at least a couple of people from Kings Langley saying, please can you charge this car park, because after a certain time we can never use it because it's always full. We have tried to answer that plea by restricting to the 4 hours, and so it was in response to people who can't use the car park during the day because it's always full up. And when it comes to parking businesses, reference was made to the different charging different parts of the high street. That again was based on the experience of Berkhamsted, where it's been shown that the different charging is understood and does work, because some businesses on the periphery would suffer more if there were more charging, and so that's been carefully analysed. Overall, it's a complete package. We would ask people if they still wish to actually object to respond to the statutory traffic regulation order when it's issued. But I understand and I appreciate the different concerns in different parts of the borough. We have only been in the street administration 8 months. We have not had time to fully grasp the whole issue of the parking strategy that was developed over many years. And so I have directed that following the implementation of the budget for 24-25, we will be forming a working party from the administration who will have the chance of looking over a number of months at parking, at the strategy, at all the different effects that the various ideas and pressures make on the lives of our residents, so that in September, October, we may have a much better, more comprehensive and understandable and parking strategy that will actually take into account many of the concerns expressed today. The fact is that because of the current economic climate, we have to have a balanced budget. We are more fortunate than other boroughs in the fact that we have had 1 or 2 windfalls, which has actually eased our problems, but it still hasn't covered all of them. And so therefore, we have been restricted in the number of movements we can make with the parking strategy. We have actually made some changes that have actually cost around £200,000 in lost income, but that is in response to the various pleas from different areas. We cannot go further at the present time, but obviously we will have to see what happens with the statutory TRO. But we are constrained by the overall economic performance of the UK as well. We have to make a balanced budget.
Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. And then the second part of Councillor Anderson's question, which was about the charging mechanisms. Ben, have we got anything further you'd like to add?
Yes, so in terms of the different payment mechanisms, we, as part of this paper, we will endeavour to look at all payment solutions in terms of cash card and electronic payment via app or phone. There are different costs associated with those payments, and in some instances, such as the tap and go, the card, they are absorbed by the council and can be as much as 15 pence per transaction, which may not sound a great deal, but in terms of if people are parking for an hour and that rolls over that space rolls over several times during the day, it can soon mount up across the whole of the borough. But absolutely, we are very keen to ensure that we keep all payment options open for where parking tariffs are applied.
Thank you. Now, I have to say that although I have councillor Guest showing first on my board, this time I did see that councillor Duris was definitely first, so I have a feeling that councillor Guest might have a priority microphone on there that may explain some of the, we'll call it queue jumping earlier. So we'll come to councillor Duris.
Thank you very much. I know my place. I hear what Councillor Tyndall has said about the NAP in Kings Langley. Can I just make a small plea, and I'll probably make it again if I get the opportunity at the Task and Finish group, in terms of the library, which is a community volunteer library staffed entirely by volunteers. So, and I think I'm right in saying that there's no staff parking available at the library in Kings Langley. So when the consideration is made, can I make a plea that perhaps some dispensation is available for the volunteer library staff who give their time for free to get the benefit of some discretionary parking at no charge? Thank you.
Thanks. I saw your pen going there, councillor Tyndall, so I'm guessing there isn't really a response, but you've taken that down. Councillor Guest.
Thank you, Chairman. I would never jump the queue in front of councillor Duris.
Oh, yes, you would.
Yes, it is still a pantomime season, just. I see that in this latest iteration of the parking charges strategy, that the price of a minimum stay in the Water Gardens North car park, a popular car park with shoppers, is still going up by 100%. So this car park is one that's extremely useful to shoppers, particularly those who've got large, bulky or heavy goods to remove from the town centre, and the sort of goods that's not practical to carry by bike or on foot. So in the latest round of consultation, has there been any feedback from local businesses as to possible impact? Bear in mind, lots of the businesses in the town centre are large businesses which the head officers may have policies about not responding to consultations, but has there been any feedback from any of the small businesses?
I thank you very much for the question. I'll refer you back to the previous scrutiny committee that was presented with a report on the informal consultation that took place during the autumn of last year. I seem to recall that the number of businesses that responded to the to the informal consultation was below 5 across the whole borough. So, and it wasn't shown whether they were a large or an SME type business.
On that question, councillor Guest.
No, I don't, thank you.
Okay, councillor England.
Thank you. I might go off on a tangent here slightly. We're talking about car parks and car parking charges here, but there is another parking issue which I think we have to have in the back of our minds, and that is in many of our residential streets, you can't park anywhere near your house, and the council has a duty to think about that problem as well. And in many ways, adopting some charges where perhaps there weren't charges before is part of trying to address the fact that as a society we're massively dependent on the car, and we're reaching the point where some of our streets are full up. So that's an uncomfortable fact, but it's very much a reality, and I think probably for all of us, and we need to weigh that as well, because the reality is that doing something in our shopping spaces or in our leisure spaces is part of changing the relationship that we have with the car. The other point I wanted to make is just referring back to the previous discussion we had about consultations. There were additional opportunities for the public and for businesses to comment on this issue. This administration is serious about consultation, and so much so that we did additional stages of consultation to try and find out what was going on. The consultation response was low, and we had to try really hard to listen to the strands of opinion, which I think came through in the free-form responses. There were several themes which we were able to highlight with officers, and which were helpful. So it's wider than just a numbers game. This is about trying to deal with population increase, and habits, and people getting older, new families coming in, perhaps with 3 or 4 cars in the family. If that goes on, then we will hit a problem of some kind or another. Thank you.
Thank you. Not sure there is an answer needed on that one, so I'll go straight to Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a move in the right direction as far as we're concerned. It's about the 3rd iteration. It's sort of been the longest running car park review we've ever had. Everyone gets slightly better as we hammer the motorists slightly less in each iteration. But there's still some significant increases in here. You know, if you want to stop in Berkhamsted High Street and buy a paper, the increase is 300%. Shortest stay in the Water Gardens car park is going from 60p to £2.30. So by sort of a default of playing with the system, the increases are quite significant. I don't believe in they'll make a difference to people whether they want to park their cars in their residential roads. They might get more cars in residential roads if they're trying to avoid the car parks. People will not give up their cars. They'll just give up coming to our towns if we price them out of being able to park in short-term available and convenient parking. And I'd invite Councillor England to go back to the consultation. The reason we didn't get much feedback from the informal consultation, and I understand car parking as well as anybody in this room, with the exception perhaps of Ben, you could never have understood any of what was came in the revised tariffs from the consultation. It never mentioned charging £2 for free bays. You wouldn't find that anywhere in the informal consultation. You wouldn't find the scrapping of the half-hour and 1-hour tariffs in the consultation. You could never have known what the proposals were for the consultation, so you were never going to get any meaningful feedback. I asked if you would be more inclined to buy an electric car if they were cheaper or if the charging points, but that's not relevant to car parking charges, and the consultation was an exercise in pointlessness. I still think that the way in which we're doing this is still to the disbenefit of our businesses and communities. I know we need to raise more revenue, but you know, we've had a conscious decision over previous years, with the challenging situation there is in the retail environment, not to use car parking charges disproportionately. We know that some of our towns don't have the same appeal as some of our neighbouring centres. If you're going to charge a similar charge to park in Hemel Hempstead as you're charging in St Albans, people are going to vote with their cars and go to St Albans. We've always tried to price our car parking to encourage people to visit our towns rather than go elsewhere. And this is the reverse of that. And for many of our struggling areas, I think this is going to just be a touch too much. But we will see what comes out of the next round of consultation and how the decision delegated to the leader transpires through that process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Again, I'm not sure a response is needed. That Councillor Tyndall.
All I will say, thank you for the point that we have attempted to move to respond to the criticisms, but I would like to point out that in the very short time we've had to deal with this, we have had to manage with no rise in parking over the last 3-4 years, which meant that it's all come in one big hit. We are going to look to see whether that is a sensible way of proceeding in future. And also, of course, when inflation this year hit 11%, which again hit every service and everybody in the country. So, and that was an external effect, not created by the council. So unfortunately, councils had to deal with issues, this administration's had to deal with issues beyond its control and had to manage the situation as best we can.
Thank you. Councillor Gale.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to ask a question about the limited weight bays, pages 84 and 85. They've been, the amount of time's been reduced from it's currently 1 hour, no return within 2 hours, to 30 minutes, no return within 2 hours. I mean, they're all free, so there's no added, I don't think there's any added income from that. I just wondered what the thinking was behind reducing the time for the limited weight bays in those places.
Ben?
Yes, so the reason for that was to have a standard approach. It was easier for residents and visitors to understand that we're trying to standardise parking across the borough. So if you're parking in a particular area, be it Hemel Hempstead or be it in Berkhamsted or Kings Langley, then it's a standard approach.
Did you have a follow-up, Councillor Gale? No. Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Capozzi, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to come back on a comment that Councillor Williams made about the price to stop in Berkhamsted to get a newspaper increasing by about 300%. Actually, the bays outside Bobby's newsagent and the other independent store at the other end of the high street at the bottom of Kitsbury Road are actually remaining, or no, have gone back to being free for that exact reason, that we wanted to support those local small independent businesses. If you want to buy a newspaper from Marks and Spencer's or WH Smith, you can pay the 80p for 30 minutes to park. Otherwise, support the local businesses at either end of the high street, which is still free. And that's also the point to Councillor Gale's 30 minutes. The location of those bays are at the peripheries of the high street, which is where you find your more independent as opposed to the bigger, larger chains. So they were the reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Capozzi. I have no more questions, so I'll give a quick check if there are any more. No, we will close off a parking item on the agenda, and we will now move on to the Climate and Ecological Programme update. And so we welcome Councillor England.
Yes, hello. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit the only time, or perhaps the only statutory time that I will come along to this committee, as we're likely, I think we are due to move off to strategic planning and environment after the next council meeting. Happy to come back anytime that the committee wants to hear about this particular subject, and the same goes for housing and community. This report is, as read, it's intended to be a bit of a summary as to where we've got to from now. As you can see, it has been written in a financial vein. We've tried to pick out some numbers rather than just talking about, Greta Thunberg or anything like that. Welcome questions, but before we get to that, just want to say that the way that we reduce CO2 can't be a linear reduction. So we can't just do a little bit every year and stay on a line. We really need to be attacking this issue. And if we do, the good news is that there are significant savings particularly in energy, but those savings can be replicated amongst our population, which I'm sure will make them very, very happy. There's a lot to be said for prioritising sheltered housing, because it's one of the forms of housing that we want to be most attractive. I think just the last thing I would say is that I was actually shocked to find that there was a report sitting on the shelf which was capable of saving this council £500,000 a year. And unless we'd had a portfolio holder for climate emergency, I think it might have stayed on the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor England. Do we have any questions regarding the climate and emergency working paper? The Councillor Williams itching towards his button.
No. I'm just an observation. I'm just pleased to see that so much of the work put in place by the previous administration is coming to fruition, Chairman.
Again, I'm not sure we need a response on that one. Councillor Capozzi.
My comment was, it wasn't a question, it's a comment. And I too was delighted to see how much work has been done. I know there's the question of when this report was coming has been asked at a number of meetings, this meeting and also the housing community. So it's delightful that it's here. It's very informative. And obviously the time spent to gather thoughts and information and data has been well used, because we obviously have a very clear path of where we're going with this now. So congratulations to all, and the two-man team that there is now focused on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to throw a question out, and Nigel, this one's to you, because it's connected to this and the question that Councillor Burley had earlier. So obviously we've looked at putting a reasonably large amount of money into our general reserves to do with the climate and emergency work. We did have a question before about how its use in terms of council assets. So I just want to double check. If we put this money directly into the general reserve under this heading, are we going to have problems moving it into the HRA if we are trying to make improvements and repairs on our stock that are going to result in lower running costs and a better environmental sustainability?
Yes, is the short answer. These funds are not there to support the HRA. The HRA needs to be self-sufficient, and that's set out in statute. What these funds can be used for is supporting the climate and ecological action plan. And I think there's a group with Aidan and Council England that will work on developing some of the business cases that will hope to pump prime some of those projects and bring them, as Council England has alluded to, sooner rather than later in that delivery plan. So I would watch this space, because again, because it is a reserve, those allocations will be agreed by Cabinet, so they will go through scrutiny in Cabinet before they're formally approved.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Elliott.
I think it's
okay. We'll go to Councillor Jurison.
No, Councillor Elliott was before me.
Sorry, when I'm looking away, I do have to say that the microphones are very good in the fact that they will generally record who puts a button down, but they're so I know that all the microphones on this desk get priority, so we come in immediately. So that Councillor Elliott, and I think we've discovered that Councillor Guests also is on that priority loop. So that's why I'll see the things on the top line first. So for all of that, we will go to Councillor Duris.
I feel quite hurt now, not on the priority list. I do have some anecdotal comments that from some of my residents who live in council houses or DVC houses, that they've had hybrid heat pumps installed, but they are very concerned, and they recognise the need for that in reducing our carbon footprint. But they are concerned that it appears, and I say appears, that the cost of the energy to run these is significant. Now, it's something that I am talking to officers about, but it's something that we might need to just bear in mind, that if we're getting the benefit in one hand and the residents are getting the disbenefit in the other hand, in terms of the cost of running the heating in their home, then that's something that we need to be aware of.
Councillor England, if you'd like to respond, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Doris. I think you're probably talking about a similar issue to one that has come across my desk and which I've raised with Darren. It's possible that we have some heat pumps fitted which are too big, and consequently they use a lot of energy, and they may be unsuited to the properties they've been fitted to. I don't know if that's accurate at this stage, but we are trying to establish if that is indeed the case.
Can I just come back? Perhaps I could catch up with Councillor England outside this meeting to see if we are talking about the same areas, and if we are, then we can communicate, and if we're not, then we'll go our own ways.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, this is about electric cars to Councillor England. You probably noticed in the news that Hertz in America have written off $200 million worth of Tesla cars because nobody wants to use them. Also, Volvo and Volkswagen are paring back on their production of electric cars because they're far too expensive. How does he balance that with the fact of wanting to put in more electric charging points when basically most fleet cars, most cars, electric cars in this country are bought by businesses and are fleet cars where the individual who can't afford a £40,000 new car are basically giving them a bit of a body swerve for the old fossil fuel powered cars.
Well, there's obviously a debate which goes on in social media about EVs, and there's a debate that goes on in the commercial world about different forms of mobility. It's currently the case that 23% of, in January, 23% of new registrations were EVs. Currently, the population, the segment of EVs among all cars on the road is 3.3%, which means that growth is 6 times what we currently have. It's really, really fast. So we need to be aware we're in an environment where we can't plan for today, we need to plan for tomorrow. I think the debate about whether there is a serious alternative to EVs in the future has been had, and we can possibly debate different articles, but there is a substantial amount of evidence that EVs are going to be the way forward, and manufacturers have begun to shape their supply chains accordingly. So I'm confident that we're heading in the right way. And like I say, when we think about provision of EV charge points, we need to be aware that the market is going to come in behind this. It already is. There are many, many more rapid EV charge points now than there were when the previous administration embarked on their programme. And it's even arguable that if we'd managed to shift that programme along a bit more, then number one, Councillor Williams could have had the credit for announcing it. And number two, we would have probably made more money by now.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Well, sort of. I think Councillor England sounds like the managing director of Betamax. But there we are. Last question, really. Look at about the e-bikes. You're looking at maybe having e-bikes in Decorum in Hemel Hempstead. How would you see that working? Would it be at all neighbourhood shopping centres? Where would be parked? Because I know in London there's issues with them being abandoned and causing problems with people tripping over them and evidently disabled people, etc. I just not sure how it would work in Hemel, but maybe you could enlighten me.
We're not really far enough along to be able to have a proper conversation about where the bikes will go, but I'm sure that time will come.
Thanks. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. How opportune. I didn't realise that I was going to be raised in the comments when I put my microphone on. My question is around the EV charging as well. And it's a shame Ben's not still here, because I'm sure he could confirm that the reason we took some time to launch the programme was simply the fact that the funding mechanism from government support was very slow coming through and being approved by the Energy Saving Trust, who were operating the process on behalf of the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. And the Osprey contract was dependent upon the piggybacks on the connected co contract, which was dependent upon the grant from that said office. So we couldn't go any faster, but I did think I had the pleasure of announcing the EV programme probably at the start of this last calendar year. So I do take credit for signing off on it. And I have to say my private concern at the time, not a council concern, but because we weren't putting any money into it, was that the operators would struggle to get a return on an investment of 2.3 million, because I was sceptical whether there'd be enough vehicles charging to generate the income. But I kept that to myself because I wanted them to install these 100 and something chargers around the borough. I'm pleased to see that we, at least the council, considers that the usage of the initial installations is high. And I just wondered, I'm not sure if we can answer the question, whether that is a view that is shared by the installers, the operators, whether they feel the usage is where they would have expected it to be at this stage. Happy to get a written answer to that one. And my second one is completely unrelated to the EV charging programme, and that relates to the electric refuse collection vehicle that's been on trial. And just interested, given the facilities that we do or don't have at Cupid Green, how we managed to charge it for 10 days.
Councillor Wood, England, are you able to answer either of those two questions?
I'm not sure I am, and I will give a written answer to that other point. The refuse vehicle, I think I'm not sure how we managed to keep it charged. We certainly didn't get it in underneath the forum, so perhaps we took it along to an Osprey charger somewhere and just simply plugged it in as you do.
Okay, so I believe that is our last question on our long-awaited climate agenda paper. So with no more questions, we will move on to our final agenda item, which is the work package. So you'll see that we've got another reasonably packed agenda for next week, for next month. I do look forward to seeing you, but not quite that much. Now, obviously, we appreciate it's been a bit of a long agenda today. That's because we obviously declined to have a January meeting. So if you've got any requests for the working for the work programme, it is very unlikely you will be able to get anything on for the next meeting. But obviously, anything further to that, reach out to me and member support. And with that, I will thank you all for your time and wish you a good night. Didn't give anybody a time, so I don't want to chase anyone up, but we've got that hush. So, so if I can get you to